Barring a miraculous 2024 turnaround, the New Orleans Saints should be looking ahead to new faces and a new direction in 2025. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're taking a look to the future. I'm tired of wallowing in the past. We're going to take a look at the future for this New Orleans Saints team, what it would look like in terms of rebuilding their roster next season, the quarterback conundrum that they face, what do they do at that position moving ahead, and of course, how the Saints can forward their franchise with new faces and a new direction. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day, and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can get a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. The New Orleans Saints have a game this weekend up against the Carolina Panthers. We'll get to previewing that game in tomorrow's Crossover Thursday episode with Julian Council of Locked On Panthers. But I think that Saints fans right now are more interested in where this team heads after this season than they sort of are about where this next weekend's game goes. I think that there's a lot of truth to that. And listen, I don't blame you, all right? This has been a tough season to watch so far, opening up with 2 explosive wins and then going into the 6-game losing streak. So instead of continuing to pound you over the head with things that have gone wrong with the New Orleans Saints and how they can't fix them and all these other things, let's take a look at what they can control, which is the decisions that they make beginning this off season, which could begin here during the season. We'll see how things go. But barring some type of miraculous turnaround for the New Orleans Saints, who are coming off of a 6-game losing streak, there are going to be some big decisions that are made over the course of this offseason that are pretty much going to lead to new faces, new directions, and kind of a new era for this New Orleans Saints team. So let's explore what that could potentially look like. Let's start off with new leadership. All right. I'm going to start with just looking at the coaching staff. I'm not going to dive into the general manager conversation because typically the general manager at least gets the opportunity to replace the head coach that doesn't work, and then the general manager becomes under fire at that point. That has not happened yet. Sean Payton left. The Saints appointed Dennis Allen as their new head coach from inside the facility. They have not done an external head coaching hire, and so I think that those are all going to be things that are going to play into the favor of not moving on from Mickey Loomis, not moving on from the general manager, or making any type of pushing for a change at general manager, while instead looking at the head coach. I think Dennis Allen is the guy that ends up kind of being the one that's held accountable for this, and that ends up being the guy that takes the brunt of all this situation, and not undeservingly so. He would tell you himself that this is a results-based business. The results that you've seen over the course of the past 3 seasons have not been up to par, up to standard with what the New Orleans Saints' new standard is, which has been kind of built from 2006 to 2021. So I would say that it's very likely that you're looking at the head coaching change more than it is likely that you're looking at the general manager change, unless something else goes funky at some point. Then maybe a guy like Kai Harley or somebody like that steps into that role or something in that situation. So we can acknowledge that, but really the bulk of the conversation has to start at the coaching staff. And really it starts off at head coach. If the New Orleans Saints were to move on in season, I've already expressed that to me, the right interim head coach would be Darren Rizzi. Anytime that you have the opportunity to pull an interim head coach that's already been your assistant head coach, that has been a special teams coordinator, that has been with everybody, that's an easy decision to make. And he's a great leader as well. Players really respect him, all that. So that would be an easy one. But then getting into the offseason, you expand your coaching search and then you look to bring somebody from outside of the facility. And I cannot stress this enough. The New Orleans Saints need new faces, new ideas, new direction. That's what they need. That doesn't mean they have to flip their entire staff. That's going to be up to the new head coach if they do change head coach at all. But if nothing else, if they do make that change at head coach, I think you have to go outside of the facility to find that person. You can't keep kind of cycling in sort of the same cycle of coaches that you already have in the building and all these other things. Now, the big question is, do you want the coach that will be the coach coordinator Or do you want the head coach that is just the head coach? And then you go back to having an offensive coordinator that calls plays on offense, a defensive coordinator that calls plays on defense. That's the big question in terms of where you go. But it's all going to come down to who interviews best and who they feel is the best fit. Now, obviously, the two biggest names when it comes to any coaching search this offseason are going to be Detroit Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, and in my opinion, Minnesota Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores. Those are going to be the two guys that are going to be at the top of a lot of lists. You're going to see names like Bobby Slowick. You're going to see the Buffalo Bills DC. You're going to see Joe Brady from Buffalo as well. You're going to see a few of these other names. But Ben Johnson, Brian Flores, those are going to be the guys that are going to be the probably premier gotta go get them type of head coaching candidates. Both of them would be coach coordinators, right? Ben Johnson would probably come in and be your head coach as well as your offensive play caller. So that would mean a split probably from Clint Kubiak in that situation potentially. And then you look at Brian Flores, who would come in and be your head coach and then probably your defensive play caller as well. So that means some restructuring over on the defensive coaching staff. Now, if the Saints were to go a different direction and then bring in somebody else that comes in and is not, a head coach and play caller, then it gives you the opportunity to give Clint Kubiak a second season, which I think there's some value there. And you got to find, no matter what, you'd have to find your defensive play caller if you moved on from Dennis Allen, but you have guys in the building like Joe Woods, Marcus Robertson, and others. Another guy that's been getting a lot of attention, of course, is linebacker coach Michael Hodges. Be a good way to keep him around. But again, that's all going to be up to the head coach. I think the leadership has to shift in terms of new face, new identity, new ideas coming in from outside the building. But there could be some of the, the coordinator types, some of the position coaches that you still do keep around. Some of the choices that I would absolutely avoid would be Mike Vrabel, the Tennessee Titans head coach. You just talk about a guy that, you saw all the issues that happened over in Tennessee. You saw some locker room problems. You saw all these other things. That just doesn't seem like the culture shift that you're trying to create if you're the New Orleans Saints. And then I would honestly avoid guys like Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator from the Detroit Lions, and Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator from the Buffalo Bills. I think they're both supremely talented. I think they're both going to make fine head coaches in the NFL at some point. But also, at the same time, if you're the New Orleans Saints, you're kind of just backsliding again, right? You're just going back to and rehashing old, situations and stuff. Aaron Glenn, of course, former secondary coach for the New Orleans Saints, ended up leaving along with Dan Campbell to kind of become a part of that coaching staff or head up that coaching staff over in Detroit. Joe Brady, former offensive assistant here in New Orleans, who spent some time as the co-offensive coordinator or whatever he was with the LSU Tigers, and then has had, struggled with Carolina, but then has had a big time revival as taking over play calling last year for the Buffalo Bills and then being the offensive coordinator this year. All great when you've got Josh Allen throwing the football, but the Saints, depending upon the head coach change, there's a ripple effect that happens to where you're not sure exactly what's going to happen at quarterback either. We're going to dive into that next here in just a sec. But I do think that avoiding guys that have been in your building before is an important step here. You have to get fresh ideas, fresh faces, fresh perspectives. And I know I've said that like 3 or 4 times already, but to me, that's the most important part about this situation. If the New Orleans Saints do indeed end up moving on from Dennis Allen at season's end, by season's end, however it goes, I don't think that you can go back to just cycling in the same ideas, the same thought processes, all these other things. You have to revamp. You have to have sort of new ideas, fresh faces, fresh perspectives. And so I think that guys like Ben Johnson, Brian Flores, and others, there are other coaches out there. Of course, there are other potential head coaches out there as well. There's a long running list of them and everything. But I think that like those 2 guys are the kind of premier guys that you're looking at, and then see what you can figure out after that. Now, the big question is going to be, are the New Orleans Saints going to be in a situation where they change head coach and therefore also need to change quarterback, or are they going to try to sell Derek Carr to whoever the new offensive coordinator is? I think either will be effective for different reasons and for different pursuits, but it is a bit of a conundrum in terms of how the New Orleans Saints will approach quarterback next. So let's talk about that next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at Built. Built is breaking ground as a neighborhood points program, rewards program that is hooking you up with points for paying your rent. Every month you pay your rent and then you watch the Built points roll in. Use your points to jet off on a dream vacation. You can put your points towards a flight or a hotel stay with over 500 airlines, over 700,000 hotels and properties as well. You'd also put them towards booking fitness studio classes, redeem them towards a future rent payment. These are all designed to meet your lifestyle. Pay your rent hassle-free through the Built Rewards app. Your rent game just got a major upgrade. Built points have been consistently ranked the highest value point currency by the Points Guy and Bankrate. So earn points by paying your rent right now when you go to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnfl. That's joinbilt.com/locked-on. Make sure you use our URL so that they know that we sent you. Joinbuilt.com/lockedonnfl so that you can start to earn points on your rent payments today. All right, family, bringing in a new direction for the New Orleans Saints seems like a likely scenario in 2025, but the Saints might have to kind of do this in steps depending upon how they treat the quarterback conundrum that they are in. Now, obviously, this team and this structure, this coaching staff is a big fan of Derek Carr. Mickey Loomis was on WWL Radio just on Tuesday night discussing how much that's going to help get the team, getting him back and all those other things. Like I mentioned, unless Derek Carr is going to be blocking for himself, blocking for Alvin Kamara, tackling defenders, and rushing the quarterback on the opposite side of the football, I don't know how much he helps your entire team, but he certainly helps you out when it comes to your offense and getting your offense running again, as both the young quarterbacks struggled to do so. But also, half of the New Orleans Saints losing streak is still with Derek Carr at the helm and with better amount of players on the field as well. So that's the big thing, right? Getting Derek Carr back helps, but does it make your team a winner? Does it help your team play complementary football? Does it help your defense tackle and rush the passer and finish plays with the quarterback? I don't know that it does that. Actually, as a matter of fact, I can tell you it won't do that. So I think with all of that considered, it's easy for this organization in this iteration of the coaching staff to be excited about getting Derek Carr back. But are you going to be able to sell Derek Carr to a new head coach and all those other things? Now, that might be part of the head coach search if the Saints do indeed go down that route in looking for a new head coach, that they would only hire somebody that's good with working with Derek Carr for at least another season, because keeping Derek Carr is probably the easiest route for the New Orleans Saints to go. Because restructuring him saves you $30-ish million when you're already $62 million over the salary cap. He has a no trade clause in his contract, so you're probably not trading him. If you were to release him, you're saving less than $2 million. And you would have to do so before the new league year begins, because if you did it after the new league year begins, then there's even more guaranteed money that sets in. And so that further complicates the issue, so on and so forth. And no, designated him as a post-June 1 release is not going to be an option, because then you'd still have to carry his massive cap hit into the 2025 new season. You wouldn't actually get that accounting back until June 2nd. So it doesn't help you in the situation that you're in. Now, the Saints, with the extension of Alvin Kamara, helped themselves. They saved $18 million-ish for next season. So instead of them being over $81 million over the salary cap, they're just over $62 million over the salary cap. They can get under the cap by a restructure to Derek Carr, which would save him around $30 million, a restructure to Marshawn Lattimore, which would save them just over $10 million, and then the retirement that we expect for Ryan Ramczyk would save them just under, I think it's around $18 or so million. So those three moves alone would get you just under or compliant with the salary cap. You'd have to then make additional moves in order to actually have money to spend in free agency. And that's where this gets even more further complicated, because if we're honest, this year's rookie class of quarterbacks that's coming in 2025, there's not really a lot of day one starters in the conversation. Some people will have quarterbacks that they really like: Cam Ward, Jalen Milroe, Shedeur Sanders, all that. I get it. Garrett Nussmeier, I understand. There's guys that you're going to like, but are there guys that are actually going to be day one starting quarterbacks in the NFL? That's very hard to project. I know a lot of people that are concerned about this quarterback class being similar to the 2022 quarterback class of Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, and others. And so, but with maybe a better top side than Kenny Pickett in this situation, of course. So we'll see where things go, but I don't know that you can rely on drafting a quarterback and starting them in 2025 as a viable, true, let's plan for this option or let's plan for this path type of option. And unless you're super stoked about guys like Sam Darnold and Justin Fields and Jacoby Brissett, Mac Jones, Andy Dalton, Jimmy Garoppolo, Joe Flacco, and Carson Wentz, there's not really a free agency market out there for you either. And so if you're in a situation to where you either have to make the decision to roll with a bridge free agent quarterback that comes off of that list, or restructuring Derek Carr, doing what you got to do to get under the salary cap, try to build this team back up, go into the draft without necessarily a nose towards a quarterback in the first round, and instead going after some of the bigger names out there that can be immediate contributors to your team. We'll go over some of those names here in just a little bit. Then I think that's probably your best option. And then maybe one of those other guys that we just named off of that not so great free agency quarterback list comes in as your veteran backup, which the Saints very much could have used this season, the one season where they didn't have one to fall back on outside of Taysom Hill, but obviously they don't look at Taysom Hill that way. So with Derek Carr, you're kind of having to sell your new head coach if you change head coach. And then if that head coach is an offensive play caller or want to change at offensive play calling, you have to sell that person on Derek Carr for another year and all those other things with an eye towards the future. Now, you can make the decision to say, you know what, that's what we're going to do, and then kind of do like what you've seen other teams do. I'm not going to say the name of the team, but because we don't curse on this show, but like you saw that team up in Georgia do, to where you saw them spend a ton of money on a free agent, but then also draft a quarterback in the first round in the top 10. Saints could go that route if they wanted to. They could restructure Derek Carr. They could draft a quarterback in the top 10 if that's where they're picking right now. They're in line for the number 6 overall pick, so you're probably not getting the top end guys like Cam Ward or Jalen Milroe. I assume those are the top end guys amongst the conversation that we're seeing right now. Shedeur Sanders in that category as well. Garrett Nussmeier in that category without probably having to move up a little bit more. Or we'll see where they end up by the end of the season. They might be picking higher than 6 or lower than 6 or earlier than 6, and that might end up taking care of itself. And so then you draft that quarterback, you sit them for a year, have them behind Derek Carr, and then at 2026, you're ready to roll out your quarterback. I think that is probably the best option, right? Best option that's foreseeable at this time. We'll see what happens by the end of the season, right? Like we're in week 9 of the NFL season. Week 9 of the NFL season in 2022, no one was talking about Derek Carr getting traded or being cut and then heading over to a new team from the Las Vegas Raiders, right? But then by the time you got to the end of that season and then they sat him down for the last 2 games and all these other things, then you saw that storyline progress, right? You saw that storyline become available. So there will be time for all of these other weird things to potentially happen around the NFL. Guys that we didn't expect to hit the market will hit the market. Guys we didn't expect to be on the trade block, all those other things. And so there could be those situations. And Derek Carr could be a part of that category, right? Like Derek Carr has a no trade clause, so I'm ruling out trading. But there's still a chance that ends up happening before the new league year begins to get him to a situation that he would like to go back to or go to or anything like that. I inadvertently said go back to. I'm not campaigning for him to go back to Las Vegas, but certainly that could be an option. But it's certainly a space where they could go if he decides, yeah, I'll go somewhere, let you guys start your whole thing new and all that other stuff. But knowing Derek Carr, the New Orleans Saints organization showed him a lot of respect in bringing him here and showing him that they wanted him. He was considering the New York Jets. Maybe the Jets job comes open because Aaron Rodgers ain't looking so great. And then maybe that becomes something that is enticing to Derek Carr. But outside of that, what you're really looking at is a guy that's probably going to be more than willing to stick around and mentor another young quarterback to take over in 2026. I don't think that Derek Carr is somebody that looks at himself as above that. And so I think that there's a real opportunity for something like that. And I think you've seen that here over the course of the last couple of games with Sam Darnold, Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener, and just kind of the mentorship that Derek Carr has shown during that time and stuff like that. He hasn't really shied away from it at all. And he certainly hasn't made any noise about it. So that's all positive stuff. So there could be a way for the Saints to do that, right? Restructure Derek Carr, keep him around for 2025, sell the new head coach if they make a change on that, and then build towards that next young quarterback starting. You also don't have to go in the first round. You could go in the mid rounds. There's some good mid-round quarterbacks, again, in this year's draft. That's probably where I like the quarterbacks the most, as opposed to the guys that are at the top. Because if they don't work out, they don't work out. But if they do, then great. And I think of a guy like Drew Aller, for instance, out of Penn State, is an exciting young quarterback that has a lot of really good physical tools that would be worth developing for a year before potentially giving him a shot. So the Saints, as we've said over and over again on this show, should not limit themselves to just Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler being their options post Derek Carr. And very unlikely that they will, especially if they do make a change at head coach, because that head coach is going to have their own vision of what that quarterback position does look like. All right, coming up next, I want to dive into rebuilding the roster. We looked at quarterback, we looked at head coach. Now let's look at the rest of the roster and where the New Orleans Saints might be able to make some improvements, particularly in the 2025 NFL Draft. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, where you get to tackle all the NFL action every single week. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and they'll end up getting $150 in bonus bets if you win. How awesome is that? FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything that you need to be able to place live bets across the NFL, check in on stats, live play-by-play, all in the same place where you place your bets. It's all in one place. For instance, right now, the New Orleans Saints now 7-point favorites at Carolina. My goodness, the Carolina Panthers just traded away wide receiver Deontay Johnson to the Baltimore Ravens. So not so much, not even a little bit of scoring potential left for that Carolina Panthers offense, but we'll see how things go when it comes to the New Orleans Saints in this game. But the Saints heavily favored on the road in this one. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with bets just like that and others all around the world of sports. You're going to be able to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Don't waste any hunches. And of course, make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. We broke down a look at head coach, at quarterback, and some of the options that the Saints have ahead of them. Not all of them, but some of the more kind of readily available options. And I want to do the same, taking a look at several other positions where the New Orleans Saints could absolutely use a boost going into 2025, places where they need to rebuild their rosters. We went through forwarding the franchise, quarterback conundrum. Now let's rebuild the roster a little bit. And we're going to focus mostly on draft prospects here. I want to give you kind of an early introduction to draft prospects. We're only about a little bit beyond halfway through the college football season. So here's a chance for you to kind of get familiar with some of the names that are out there. So let's start off at a place where I think the New Orleans Saints obviously need the most help, which is on the offensive line. They have some real options here in terms of how they do that in this year's draft. And of course, the big name that everyone's going to want to discuss and everyone's going to want to be talking about, of course, is LSU offensive tackle Will Campbell. Now, a lot of people are going to write this off because I said LSU. We're talking about the New Orleans Saints and stuff like that, but we're also about new leadership, new faces, new direction. And so if that's the case, let's play along with that. So Will Campbell is somebody that's very interesting, obviously coming in as this big offensive tackle that is probably going to be the top offensive tackle in this year's class, 6'6", 323 pounds. So far this season, no sacks allowed. 2 sacks allowed back in 2022, but none since then. Has been somebody that has been very good in both the pass game and in the run game. A little bit more of a zone blocker than a gap blocker, so that feeds into the wide zone offensive system. Should the New Orleans Saints keep that direction, will very likely be the first offensive lineman off the board, at least from the outlook of today. Obviously, a lot of things can happen between now and the draft. We'll see how things go injury-wise, health-wise for other players, all these other things. But that's an interesting route for New Orleans to go. You'll see that name a lot for the New Orleans Saints. You also see a couple of the Texas tackles in Kevin Banks and others. Cameron Williams is another one that you're going to see a lot of too. Any of those guys that you're helping to bolster your bookends, I think helps. And the thing that's really interesting is Will Campbell, who plays left tackle, would give you an opportunity to move Taliesin Fuanga back to his initial position, right, his natural position of right tackle that he played over in college. And then you make the decision of whatever you want to make with Trevor Penning at that point. Try him out on the interior, keep him as a backup, use him as a trade piece, whatever it might be. There's options there. So obviously, when you get the opportunity to get somebody that's like an all-world offensive tackle, you probably take that opportunity. And right now, with the Saints drafting just outside the top 5 through week 8, there's a good chance that this is a player that ends up being available to them, or at least in striking distance, should they decide that they want to take a leap and make a move. Sticking on the offensive line, obviously the Saints need some help in the interior there too, but I don't think they have to be in a rush when it comes to that one. A lot of the interior offensive linemen are going to be guys that are going to go at the end of the first round or at the beginning of the second round. If they're picking high in the first round, they're picking high in the second round as well. So they're in position to take advantage of what might be there. Guys like Tyler Booker out of Alabama are obviously a good example. You could also draft a player at one position, shift them over to another position. We've seen the New Orleans Saints do that time and time again. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But you've got a guy like Tyler Booker, who's got a ton of experience throughout his career with Alabama, only allowed 2 sacks as well throughout his career. In fact, is really going into the season had only in 2 years allowed 14 total hurries even. So not really allowing a lot to get past him. Great pass blocker, needs a little bit development as a run blocker, but has the agility, has the athleticism to operate in the zone run game. Has a ton of experience at left guard, which is where I think you're going to be more likely to have to make a replacement with Lucas Patrick just on a 1-year deal. And so that could be a spot where the Saints go there. They could also wait a little bit longer. A guy like Armaj Reed Adams, my apologies, coming out of Texas A&M. He stands at 6'5", 330, probably going to measure in a little bit lower than that, but a little bit more of a balanced run blocker and pass blocker, not as stout a pass blocker as Tyler Booker is, but gives you some advantage in both areas of the game. Good in gap scheme, good in zone scheme, has allowed just 3 sacks over the course of his career, including just 1 so far this season. Has left guard experience, has right guard experience, has right tackle experience as well. But right tackle is where he surrendered, the year that he played right tackle is where he surrendered most of his only 2 sacks, and so or 2 of his 3 sacks, most of his sacks. And so you probably want to keep him away from that tackle spot, but if you keep him on the interior and allow him to be able to do what he does with his athleticism, that could be somebody that helps you to rebuild that interior as well. I'm a little bit less concerned with Eric McCoy. I think you want to keep Eric McCoy at center as much as you can. You just want to get him back healthy at this point. So that's just some suggestions in terms of early guys. There's other guys that are a little bit later, like Jacksonville State's Clay Webb, for instance, and others that could potentially be guys that challenge for you as well. So lots of good opportunity there to build up either your starting core, your starting 5, or at least have better depth than what your depth this year proved to be. All right, let's take a look at some of the skill position players for the New Orleans Saints over on offense. Wide receiver, running back, tight end, all places where I could see this New Orleans Saints team looking for opportunity to be able to develop here. The wide receiver class is kind of weak, I'm going to be honest with you, in terms of what we're seeing so far. There's 2 names at the very, very top, and one of them is Travis Hunter, who is more athlete, right? Plays wide receiver, plays corner. Where is he going to play in the NFL? I think he'll probably play wide receiver in the NFL, but we'll see. But obviously, he's somebody that would be on the radar in the top 5. Another guy on the radar in the top 5, of course, is Tetairoa McMillan, or T-Mac, coming out of Arizona. I think actually drafting at 6 is probably going to be too late for this guy. You're going to have to get higher if you want to grab T-Mac, but 6'5" is where he's listed. He's probably going to be more like 6'4", 6'3", but 200 plus pounds as well. Just the big body dominating type of wide receiver that the Saints just don't have on the roster right now. Chris Olave needs another complement, needs another player that can be that big body dude. That's why the pairing of Chris Olave and Michael Thomas was so appealing if Michael Thomas had been able to stay healthy, but that just didn't end up being the case. And so now you would get a guy like Tetairoa McMillan who catches 45% of his contested catches so far this season, with 9 contested catches as a whole. So he's been targeted about 20 times in those situations and coming home with a lot of them, 3.23 yards per route run. He's not the most athletic guy with the ball in his hands. You watch some of his tape and stuff like that. You see him try to make some spin moves every now and then. Almost always goes down in those situations. But look, is a guy that is an absolute behemoth. Almost 1,400 receiving yards last year. Through 8 games so far this year, 979 receiving yards and 5 receiving touchdowns. The dude's absolutely like the top number 1 wide receiver in this year's class. You're going to hear a lot about Luther Burden as well out of Missouri. Could be another option for New Orleans. Running back, we all know, if you've been paying attention, even if you've only watched clips of college football on social media and haven't actually watched a college football game so far this season, you've probably heard of Ashton Jeanty because he is absolutely incredible. The running back out of Boise State, good at, yes, everything. The dude's incredible. Right now, sitting with almost 1,400 rushing yards already this season through 7 games. He has surpassed his rushing total from last year over the course of 12 games, 1,344. In 7 games already this year, 1,376. The dude's incredible. I mean, just absolutely insane. 18 rushing touchdowns on the season. He's going to have a remarkable year, continue to have a remarkable year, all that stuff. As long as he stays healthy, going to be the big thing. But obviously he would be somebody that would be a huge boost for this New Orleans Saints team that's looking for another, running back. I think. I don't think that you can rely. I mean, we saw now ever since you had Kendre Miller's hamstring injury 2 weeks or last week, you've seen the team bring back Jacob Kibodi to their practice squad. You saw them bring back Jordan Mims to the practice squad. They don't trust that Kendre Miller can stay healthy. They simply don't. And so you've got to look at another running back, and Jeanty would be the best one. And that's the guy that you have to grab at 6 if you're at 6 or in the top 10, whatever. That's your first round pick. Like there's no spending that on a running back is always a big ask, but always something you'd have to. Definitely something you'd have to do. And in my favorite tight end so far, surprise, surprise, the Penn State tight end, it's Tyler Warren. So far this season has 559 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns, big body dude, 6'6", 261 pounds, just exactly what you're looking for in another pass catching, but also blocking capable tight end as well. Safe hands as well with a 2.1% drop rate so far. And I'll give a quick shout out to TJ Sanders on the defensive interior out of South Carolina, a guy you can grab in the 2nd or 3rd rounds. That would be a really, really good bolster to your interior defensive line, because that defensive line needs more help on the interior and probably needs one of those game-breaking, can take over the game type edge rushers. I just don't know where you get them. That's going to be a big, big conversation over the course of this season or off season, is where you get that guy, because they don't really have him in the draft. Don't know if you're going to see anybody come available in free agency. You might have to talk trade when it comes to that situation, and then that impacts the rest of your draft. Whole lot of stuff there when it comes to the edge rusher situation for New Orleans. But those are the guys that I'm looking at in terms of helping to rebuild the roster, rebuild through youth, and start to make this roster a little bit younger, build up that culture that you want, all those other things. That's what worked in 2017. That's what can work again, even though it probably won't work as quickly, but certainly something. And in 2006 as well, you saw new faces, new ideas, new angles, however it is you want to look at it, and young talent that really flipped the outlook of that team. I think you can see that again, or something like it, at least get started in 2025. That's if the New Orleans Saints make the decisions that feel like they're going to have to make, that their hands are going to be forced anyway, one way or another by the season's end. All right, I've gone on long enough. That's my look. Quick, brief look at everything from coach, quarterback to the rest of the roster and everything like that. We'll do more of these and continue to look at stuff and everything. I know you're interested in what the future can look like and where the Saints can get better, even if it might not happen this season. I know that's what you're invested in. So we'll continue to look at different things like this as well. Maybe bring back mock draft Monday, stuff like that. If you want it, let me know. I'm happy to do whatever it is that's going to make this a little bit more tolerable for you throughout the next few weeks. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, go and check out Locked On NFL. And we appreciate you for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. They're not a family. Doing them. How you living? Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.